All right, we're good? Yeah. Cool. All right, welcome everybody. I'm going to rely on all you all to watch the time. So we're good to go though, right? Yes. Okay, cool. Okay, so my name is Tim Corey. We're going to talk about the 7 free Azure services to grow your career. The goal here is to utilize Azure to leverage your career as a software developer, as a person who's working around the software development space, okay? So let me give you a brief overview of what we're going to be talking about today. So I've got a lot of stuff in here. This can be an hour-and-a-half talk. We're not going to do an hour-and-a-half. So at the end of this, I'll have a QR code. You can download the slides. You can look at them later. So I put a lot of material in here. We'll kind of skip through it, and don't worry if it's not all covered. It'll be in here. And you can also reach out to me later. I have a QR code later with my contact information in case you want to reach out personally. So we're going to talk first about what are some ideas around career growth we can talk about in the cloud space. How can we use cloud to leverage your career, to move yourself forward? And then we'll talk about the actual 7 free services. That's a hook you brought you here. We'll go through the 7 different ones that are fully free forever. They can use to create various things. And then from there, I have 7 honorable mentions because there's so much stuff in Azure. I didn't want you to miss some stuff. So there's 7 extras I figure we throw in here very quickly. And then at the end, we'll talk about 5 safety tips. One of the things that, especially when you're learning some of these things, that people get concerned about is, what if I wake up tomorrow morning with an $8,000 bill? I'm sure no one in this room has ever had that happen. So, you know, what can I do to make sure that I protect myself when I am learning these things, when I am telling my company, hey, let's use these things? How can I make sure that I don't say something that really messes up our company or messes up myself and my budget, okay? So that's the kind of the overview what we're going to talk about today. Yes? It's not showing the slides? No. Because we've got a split screen. We need to change it. Display settings right there. So who here uses Azure? Sweet. Who here is like confident in everything that Azure does? Okay, we got one liar in the room. This is true. This is true. Kevin mentioned in his talk he's got a very heavy Azure bias. I have a very heavy Azure bias as well. For a number of reasons, the biggest ones though are in the safety tips category. All the cloud services do cloud. Like they all do the cloud things, and you can do, you know, storage of data, you can put data in databases, you can host websites and all the rest of the stuff in pretty much any cloud or cloud-ish service. But those safety tips, there's some things in there that can really help put some guardrails on that stuff so you don't just, again, blow up your budget or make an absolute mess. Okay, so let's talk through the career growth ideas. Again, these ideas are supposed to be things that you kind of think through when we're looking at those services. You know, when I'm looking at a service, I'm not just saying, hey, here's a cool thing, but how can I leverage this? And so there's 4 ideas I have for you. Show off what you can do. So whenever you look at a cloud service, say, hey, could I create something in this that I can show off? Can I put something in my portfolio that says, hey, I can do Azure static web apps, and here's how. So that's one option. Another option is to get experience using cloud services. So when you're looking to apply to a job, and you say, hey, I can do Azure SQL databases because here's my ability to do it. I can show off that I've done it, and I can show off that I have experience in that area, even if I didn't have a previous job that gave me experience in that cloud service. Number 3, demo what you can do. So one of the things I encourage you is when you're learning these things, create demos. And again, that's where you can get into trouble. If you're not careful, I will show you how to do it safely. But create demos that say, this is what I can do. This is how I could do it. I could do this for you. And so by showing off what you can do, then employers can say, hey, I want that for my company. Come work for me. Okay? This is why the 7 free services are awesome. because you've got 7 services that you can pay nothing for life and use and show off what you can do. Okay, the last one here is save your employer money. This is one that I love. This is where you can become the hero. So if you're currently employed and want to make your boss happy, save the money. It's a real simple formula. And the way to do that is to get experience in the cloud, in these various services, and then apply that. I worked at a company once where we were spending, I believe it was $1,100 a month on hosting. We were a software as a service. And we got that down to $400 a month by adding features by putting it in the cloud. Okay? Do you think my boss was happy? Absolutely. So I told my boss, hey, we need to kind of up this bill a little bit. Not a problem. Hey, I want to try this new feature. Not a problem. We're still saving $700 a month by being in the cloud. Okay? You can spend lots more in the cloud. So be careful how you do it. But you can save your employer money. So when we're talking about these 7 services, think about these 4 things and how you might apply one or more of those. I've got a couple of ideas for you. But Azure App Services. So Azure App Services is basically websites. Okay, this is the one that probably everyone knows about, maybe has seen. But you get 10 free websites for life. Okay, so of those 10 websites, you get 1 gigabyte of storage and 1 compute hour per day, which sounds weird. You might say, wait, my website runs for 1 hour a day. That's not what happens. Instead, what happens is when a person makes a call to your website, however long the compute time takes to build that, that's taken against your 1 hour per day. So yes, if you have lots of hits, it may at some point time out and say, hey, you can't access this until tomorrow. That's what happens with free sites. But you have 10 free demo sites to work with, again, for life. So how to use these things, I'll kind of skip over most of these, but portfolio items, startup validation, demo sites, just showing off, hey, I can build websites. The cool thing about Azure App Service is you can deploy straight code to it. So you want to deploy straight HTML, CSS, JavaScript, cool. You want to deploy a C# app or something else, not a problem. I'm a C# dev, so I'm going to focus more on C# and .NET stuff. Sorry, you Java people. But you can deploy those things as just straight code, but you can also deploy them as containers, which means that you can deploy older versions that aren't supported, not a problem. Deploy it to app services as a container, because a container can have whatever version you want inside of it. So technically what happens behind the scenes, even if you deploy straight code, it's putting it in a container for you. So either way you're getting a container, it's just that you can give it the container itself instead of just the code. Okay, that's the first one. Again, free for life. Number 2, Azure Static Web Apps, which you say, that sounds very, very similar. Yes and no. Static web apps are for sites that don't need database access directly. So think an Angular site, React site, Vue site, Blazor site, or just HTML and CSS. You get 100 gigabytes of bandwidth per subscription, okay, for pretty much as many sites as you want for free. Again, for life. You get 2 custom domains. That is not per site. That's per subscription. And you get 500 megabytes of storage. So it's not a ton, but at the same time, it's a lot. Now, what happens with Azure Static Web Apps is they get deployed as a CDN around the world. So wherever your person requests your site, it finds the closest Azure that has your replicated site and gives access to it. The cool thing is I said that it's for sites that don't need database access, but that has changed because now they allow you to hook up an API to your Azure Static Web App and give API access directly to your static site. So there is more access and there is more connectivity than before. And because you're hooking that API up directly, there's even more security around that. Like nobody else can access your API, just your site. So it adds a lot of nice features. Again, how to use it, portfolio hosting. Any JavaScript, Blazor, WASM site, if you want to use it for a nonprofit or club site, it's a great option. If you go to my website, iamtimcorey.com, it's an Azure Static Web App, okay? So I host my site. Now, I pay for it, but I pay the incredibly high price for premium of $9 per month, okay? And again, globally replicated, lots of cool features and bells and whistles with that, but $9 a month, replicate across the globe. I love it. My uptime is awesome. Okay, that's number 2, free for life. Number 3, we've got Azure SQL databases. What you get, and this is where I love cloud, because it's so easy to understand what you get with cloud, right? So you get 100,000 vCore seconds per month. Everybody got that? You know what that means? No, we don't know. But with 32 gigabytes of storage, basically what you get is you get access to a SQL database in the cloud that you can use for demo purposes. You probably shouldn't put a really heavy load against it because it's going to time out just like a web app will, okay? So you get 100,000 vCore seconds per month. That just means that if you hit it too hard, it's going to lock up at some point. But there is a free version of Azure SQL that you can use, and you get 1 per subscription. So if you already created your first free Azure SQL database, you can't create more. How can you use it? You can create a database for your multiple portfolio items. You can cloud replicate practice databases. So one of the cool things that people don't often realize is that you can have a local SQL database, and you can say, hey, I want to back this up or have it replicate to Azure, and have my Azure be a backup of that. And at some point, switch those two. You can practice that, try it out, because that's one of the ways you can help your company move from local to in the cloud, is that replication system. Hobby database. Okay, so let's go with number 4, Cosmos DB. This is a newer entry. Cosmos DB is the NoSQL database from Azure. You can get 1,000 request units per second with 25 gigabytes of storage, 1 per subscription. This is actually really high. Okay, their entry-level database starts at 400 RUs per second. So 1,000 is a lot better. And this allows you to play around with NoSQL in the cloud. Okay, the cool thing about this is that with Cosmos DB, you can have different API connectivity. So you can say, hey, I'm used to SQL commands. I want to talk to Cosmos DB like SQL, and it has an API to do that. Or I want to do like MongoDB, and it allows you to translate from a different system into Cosmos very easily. So again, free for life, 1 per subscription. All right, this is a mouthful. Azure Active Directory B2C. If you're familiar with Entra, which is the new name for Azure Active Directory, it's still not this. Entra is for if you control all the logins. You create a login for someone, usually in your company, that's Entra. It used to be Active Directory. Now, this is Azure Active Directory AAD B2C. This is for consumers. Okay, so this is where you self-sign up for a subscription. So think about Amazon. You don't talk to Amazon and say, hey, can I be on your employee directory? No. What you say is, I want to sign up for an Amazon account. And they're like, no problem, fill this form out. That's what B2C is. It's for all of your consumers. This is, again, free for life. You get 50,000 monthly active users, or MAUs. So what this means is that if I have, and I use this for, if you go to suggestions.imtimcorey.com, that's where I have all my suggestions for, hey, you want new videos, new content? Put them there. I have you log in so you can track your suggestions. Well, I use AAD B2C. And if I have 50,000 people sign up in a month, and the 50,000 first, I'll have to pay for that person. However, next month, if I have 20,000 people log in, I don't pay anything, even though I have more than 50,000 subscribed because they're not active. So this is how most authentication systems work. And this is, as far as I can tell, this is the cheapest one out there. Okay, most systems are like, hey, we'll give you 10,000 MAUs. We'll give you 20,000 MAUs. B2C says we'll give you 50,000. So if you want to do authentication for pretty much anything that you want to do auth for easily, B2C is a great option for that. All right, next up, and I know this is fire hose, just take notes if you want something, okay? Azure Functions. Azure Functions are awesome. You can do really cool stuff with them as long as you don't blow your budget. So an Azure function, you get 1 million requests per month per function. That's the consumption plan. So you can have a function run up to 1 million times a month for free. for life, forever, okay? So pretty awesome stuff. When we use that, microservices, webhook endpoints, triggered activities, these things are really good for the idea of an Azure function. So the one I use a lot is the webhooks. So we have certain activities that happen on my training site where I say, hey, when this happens, I want you to do something. Well, how do I do that? My system says, I'll call this URL, that endpoint. And then my function takes it and does something with it, okay? So Azure Functions, again, free for life. Next up, Azure Container Apps. So this is, again, a newer one. And again, this is where the really awesome cloud definitions come in. You get 180,000 vCPU seconds. Does anyone even know what that references? The 360,000, first of all, GIB seconds. Correct. And what is that then talking about? Does anyone know? I think it's 1024 bit. Correct. So a gigabyte is like a gigabyte, but real. So we talk about gigabytes, we talk about 1,000 kilobytes and 1,000 kilobytes, or 1,000 bytes in a kilobyte. But really it's 1,024. And that's the real number. However, that refers to RAM, how much memory you're using, RAM seconds. So again, cloud has different terms. So this is how much RAM we're using, this is how much CPU you're using, and 2 million requests per month, 5 minutes. So that's what you get with Azure Container Apps. You can create containers for a whole bunch of things. You're already using, with Azure Web Apps or Azure App Service, you can use containers, but this is getting closer to, I hate to say Kubernetes because it's not, but it's getting closer to that type of thing where you can play around with containers talking to each other and forming bigger clusters. So kind of an entry point into that world. All right, that's the 7. Again, that's free for life. Let's talk about the honorable mentions real quick because there's a bunch of them. So file storage, storing stuff in Azure is cheap. Storing stuff in S3 in AWS is cheap. This is what you get, but these are for the first 12 months. So you sign up for Azure, you'll get credits for a certain number of dollars, I think $200 for the first month, and then you'll also get certain services free for a year. These are free for a year. But again, storage is cheap. Key Vault, you get 10,000 transactions for the first 12 months, per month for the first 12 months. Event Grid, you get 100,000 operations per month for life. So again, if you want to start playing around with services talking to other services, maybe set up some container apps and have them talk to Event Grid, we can use Event Grid for life for up to 100,000 operations per month. Azure Service Bus, 750 hours, 13 million operations, but again, that's for the first 12 months. API management, 1 million calls a month, and that's lifetime access. So again, API management, a newer one of those offerings. Number 6, Azure DevOps. This one, I kind of hate putting this in here because it's not Azure. And this is one of those things where I hope you know that. Azure DevOps is not Azure, okay? It's in Azure. You can also access it outside of Azure. They call it Azure DevOps because of marketing, but really it's DevOps for anything. So if you're working with Java in AWS and never, ever, ever touching anything Microsoft, you can still use Azure DevOps, okay? And it's free for life for 5 users with unlimited private Git repos. So pretty awesome. And then Azure Signal R service, you get lifetime access to 20 concurrent connections per unit and 20,000 messages. So Signal R service, if you're not familiar, is a wrapper around WebSockets and other things. This makes connectivity between web clients easier. So that's that. Okay, we only have a couple minutes, but I want to go quickly into safety tips. So safety tip number 1, use resource groups effectively. If you don't know, resource groups are awesome. Resource groups are free. You just name it and say, this is the resource group. Well, when you're creating test things, give it one resource group name. And when you're done with that test thing, don't delete the test thing, delete the resource group. If you do that, it will delete every resource associated with what you created under that resource group. Which means if you create a virtual machine and it created a network, and it created a storage account, and it created something else for you. If you delete just a virtual machine, you might not get all those other things. If you delete the resource group, you get everything, okay? That's pro tip number 1. Number 2, pricing calculator. Make sure you know how to use that. If you don't know where that is, I never know where it is. I have to go to Google, I type Azure pricing calculator. It's always the first result. This will tell you exactly how much things cost. And you can play around and say, hey, I can change this and get a better rate. Number 3, budget alerts. This is an absolute must. If you're testing and you think you're not going to spend any money, set up a budget alert. You say, well, I'm not going to spend any money. Yes, set up a budget alert for $1. Make sure that you get an email that says you spent $1. Because if you get that, you're like, I've messed something up. But I've messed it up early enough that I can go and fix it right now. Okay? So if you're doing these in production, for example, I had a case where I think I was spending about $120 a month. I set up an alert for $60. You got to do the math on that and say, okay, I've spent $60. How many days left in the cycle are there? And do the math and say, okay, 14, we're good to go. If it says 27, I've got a problem. But I've only spent half my budget. Okay? Number 4, start small and grow. Don't go into Azure and try and create all this stuff all at once. That's huge. Start small and grow up. Okay? And number 5, don't just get a VM in the cloud. This is the kind of the concise way of saying don't just do what you're doing on-prem in the cloud. Think differently about the cloud. Okay? And that's it for the speed run. So this is for the slides. That's for connecting to me. If you have any questions, please let me know. All right? Thank you.